The crying started again at 1:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I'd been watching the second hand on the hallway clock, the one with the cracked face that nobody had bothered to replace because nobody looked at the hallway clock except me. I was the only person in Don Cesare Lombardi's estate who kept time by that clock. Everyone else had phones or Rolexes or places to be. I had a mop and 3 more hours of marble floor stretching out in front of me like a sentence I couldn't finish. The sound came through the nursery door the way it always did. Thin at first, like a wire being pulled too tight, and then thick, desperate, the kind of crying that doesn't want anything because it's past wanting. It's just pain looking for a way out. I knew that sound. I used to know it professionally. My hands tightened on the mop handle. The same hands that spent 4 years catching babies at 3 a.m. in a maternity ward in Cork. The same hands that could tell the difference between a hungry cry and a pain cry before the monitors could. The same hands that a review board decided weren't qualified to touch patients anymore. Those hands wanted to move. They always wanted to move when I heard that sound. But I was a maid, and maids don't walk into nurseries at 2 a.m. in a house where the wrong step can cost you more than your job. I should not have walked in, but I did. I put the mop against the wall, carefully so it wouldn't clatter, and I walked 8 steps to that half-open door, and I did the one thing no one in this house expected from the fat woman who smelled like lavender and floor polish. I picked up the Don's baby, and when I turned around, he was standing in the doorway. Let me go back, because you need to understand what kind of woman picks up a mafia boss's child at 2 a.m. and why. 14 months. That's how long I'd been cleaning floors in the Lombardi estate. 14 months of knowing every crack in every tile, every painting that hung 3 millimeters off center, every drawer that stuck in the humidity. I could map this house with my eyes closed, not because I loved it, because it was the only geography I had left. Before this, I was a midwife. I want you to hear that word and understand what it means. Not a nurse, not an assistant, a midwife. I caught babies. I counted heartbeats, real ones. The ones you find with your fingertips on a pulse point, not the ones machines draw in green lines. I could tell you whether a baby was in distress by the way its mother breathed. I could feel a breech presentation through a belly the way a sommelier tastes terroir through wine. I was good at it. I was better than good. I was the one they called at 3 a.m. when the machine said one thing and the baby said another, because I listened to the baby, and then I lost it. Not because I made a mistake, because someone else made one, and I was standing in the room when it happened. My supervisor, Dr. Brennan. A cord complication she missed, a delay she caused, a report she filed with my name where hers should have been. The review board didn't investigate. They had a body, they needed a scapegoat, and scapegoats are easier to find when they're young and new and shaped like me. I don't say that to make you feel sorry for me. I say it because you need to understand. I didn't lose my skill when I lost my license. My hands didn't forget. They never forgot. I came to Italy because I had a cousin in Naples who knew someone who knew someone. The Lombardi estate needed a cleaner. No references required, just a strong back and a willingness to be invisible. I had both. The lavender was my one indulgence. Every morning before anyone else was awake, I'd crush dried lavender into my cleaning water. It was a habit from the ward. I used to put lavender oil on my wrists before deliveries because it calmed the mothers. Now it calmed me. It was the one smell that still connected the woman I was to the woman I'd become. The staff didn't notice the lavender. They didn't notice me at all most days, except to move around me the way you move around furniture. Sarah did, though. Sarah noticed everything. She was the head housekeeper, 34, efficient, loyal to Gianna Lombardi the way a blade is loyal to the hand that holds it. Sarah had a talent for saying cruel things in a practical voice, which made them land harder. Nell, you missed a spot by the library. Pause. Hard to see the floor past yourself, I imagine. The other staff would look away, not out of sympathy, out of the same instinct that makes people avoid eye contact with someone being scolded on the street, embarrassment by proximity. I let it land. I always let it land. Because I had nowhere else to go, and because the woman who used to catch babies for a living was now catching insults, and the arithmetic was simple. A roof and a paycheck were worth more than my pride. Or so I told myself. For 14 months, I told myself that Don Cesare Lombardi's wife, Elena, died 7 months before I arrived, complications during delivery, the kind of complication I would have caught. I can't stop myself from thinking that, even now, even though it's not useful. The placental abruption happened fast. The hemorrhaging happened faster. and the hospital in Positano didn't have the blood supply for a woman who was already anemic. Mila survived. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, perfect lung function, a full head of dark hair, a baby who came into the world screaming, and according to everyone in this house, never really stopped. The crying had been bad for months, but it became unbearable 5 days before the night I walked in. Something changed, the pitch shifted higher, tighter, and the pauses between cries shortened until there were no pauses at all. Just a continuous thread of sound pulled so thin it could cut glass. 4 nannies came and went. The first lasted 8 days, the second 4. The third walked out mid-shift without collecting her wages. The fourth, a woman named Patrizia, recommended by Gianna from a connected family in Rome, lasted 36 hours before she told Sarah that the baby was possessed and she'd pray for the household, but she would not be returning. Then came the specialist. Dr. Ferri, pediatric consultant, flown in from a private clinic in Milan. Gianna arranged it. Of course Gianna arranged it. Gianna Lombardi arranged everything in this house the way a director arranges a stage, and anyone who wandered outside their mark was removed before the lights came up. Dr. Ferri examined Mila for 3 hours. Blood work, reflex tests, ultrasound. He charged €4,000 and left with a diagnosis of general fussiness and a recommendation for a different brand of formula. I stood in the hallway while he examined her, mopping the same 12 tiles over and over because I couldn't bring myself to move further away from that door. I could hear it. Through the wood, through the plaster, through €4,000 of medical expertise. I could hear what the crying actually was. It wasn't fussiness, it wasn't colic, it wasn't a baby being difficult, it was pain. Specific, localized, digestive pain. The cry had a pattern: tight inhale, high-pitched exhale, 3-second pause, repeat. I'd heard it 200 times in my career. It was the cry of a baby whose gut was reacting to something it couldn't process. My hands pressed flat against the wall. Through the plaster, I could feel the vibration of her screaming. I knew. I knew what was wrong with that baby the way I knew my own heartbeat. Instinctively, professionally, with every fiber of training that Dr. Brennan's lie hadn't managed to erase. But I was a maid. And maids don't diagnose, so I mopped, and I listened, and I let my hands ache. For 5 days, I let my hands ache. The 5th night broke something. Not in me, in the house. You could feel it. The staff moved differently, spoke in half-whispers, avoided the 2nd floor entirely after 9 p.m. The crying had become a weather system. It pressed down on every room, every conversation, every breath. I heard later that Don Cesare hadn't slept in 4 days. He spent his nights in the study directly below the nursery, sitting in a leather chair, staring at nothing. A man who controlled 6 provinces and a shipping empire couldn't control the sound coming through his ceiling. At 1:47 a.m., I started my hallway shift. The night nurse, a temp agency woman named Daria, was supposed to be in her chair outside the nursery. The chair was empty. I mopped toward it slowly, 1 tile, 2, 3. The crying was different tonight. Weaker, hoarser. Mila's voice was giving out. A baby's vocal cords can only sustain that kind of distress for so long before they start to swell. And once they swell, the breathing changes. And once the breathing changes, I stopped mopping. The door was open. Not all the way, just enough to see the edge of the crib. The glow of the nightlight shaped like a crescent moon and the small shape inside it, shaking with sobs that barely had sound anymore. Daria's phone was on the chair. She'd gone to the bathroom, or the kitchen, or home. It didn't matter where she'd gone. What mattered was that a 7-month-old baby was alone in a room, in distress, with vocal cords that were beginning to swell, and the only person within earshot was a disgraced midwife with a mop. I looked down the hallway, both directions, empty. I looked at my hands, they weren't shaking. That's the thing about training, real training, the kind that gets into your muscle memory and stays there like a second skeleton. My hands weren't shaking. They were ready. They'd been ready for 14 months. I want you to understand what this next moment cost me. In a house like this, touching the Don's child without permission isn't a fireable offense. It's the kind of mistake people disappear for. I'd heard the stories. Everyone in this house had heard the stories. Staff who overstepped. Staff who assumed. Staff who forgot that every object in this estate, including the people, belonged to the Lombardi family. But I could hear her breathing. I could hear the slight wheeze beneath the cry, the sound of airways narrowing, of a body in distress that no one was coming to help. Here's where I ask you something. If you were me, if you were standing in that hallway with 14 months of silence and 4 years of training and hands that knew exactly what to do, what would you choose? Stay in the hallway, keep mopping, keep your head down. It's not your baby, it's not your nursery, it's not your place. Walk away and let the night nurse come back and let the specialist come back and let all the credentialed, approved, connected people handle the thing you know they can't handle, or walk into the nursery because you can hear her breathing changing, because you know what that wheeze means. Because your hands are ready, and they've been ready for 14 months, and you're the only person in this house who can stop what's about to happen. Drop your vote. I'll tell you what I chose. I put the mop against the wall. I didn't lean it. I placed it carefully, the way you set down one life before picking up another. 8 steps from the hallway to the crib. I counted them. Old habit, midwives count everything. Steps to the delivery room, seconds between contractions, milliliters of blood loss. Counting is how we stay calm when the world is screaming. Mila was on her back in the crib, swaddled tight in a white muslin blanket that someone had wrapped like they were packaging a gift. Neat corners, precise folds, the kind of swaddle that looks beautiful in photographs and restricts a baby's diaphragm by 30%. I unwound the swaddle first. Gently, the way you peel bark from birch, with reverence, not force. Mila's tiny body expanded as the pressure released. Her crying hitched, not stopping but shifting, as if her lungs were tasting space for the first time in hours. Then I checked the room. 23 degrees. Too warm by at least 2. A newborn regulates temperature through their head, and this room was sealed like a greenhouse. I reached for the thermostat on the wall and brought it down to 20.5. Then I looked at her. Really looked. The way I used to look. Not at a baby, at a patient. Behind her left ear, where the skin folds meet the hairline, a rash. Faint, pink, raised in tiny clusters that anyone who wasn't looking for them would miss entirely. But I was looking. I'd spent 4 years looking at exactly this part of a baby's body, because this is where milk protein intolerance shows first, not on the belly, not on the cheeks, behind the ears. Mila wasn't fussy. She wasn't colicky. She wasn't possessed. She was allergic to her formula. Every bottle they'd been giving her for 5 days, for weeks probably, had been making her gut cramp and her skin burn, and no one had looked behind her ears. I lifted her out of the crib and held her against my chest, skin to skin. My hand on the back of her head, 17 centimeters of circumference. I measured automatically healthy range. My other hand flat against her back, feeling the rhythm of her breathing slow, deepen, steady, and then I hummed. It wasn't a strategy. It wasn't a technique from a textbook. It was the thing I always did when I held a newborn, a melody I'd learned from my grandmother in Wexford, who used to say that babies don't need songs, they need vibrations, and the best vibration is a chest that's humming something old. Fai la nana, cocine di pollo. I felt Mila's fingers move against my chest, small, automatic, the way a newborn's fingers open and close like sea anemones. Her hand brushed the pocket of my apron, the pocket where I kept a small bunch of dried lavender wrapped in cheesecloth, the same lavender I put in my cleaning water every morning. Her fingers closed around the lavender sprig, tight. The way only a baby can grip. Total, absolute, with the full conviction of a body that doesn't know how to let go. The crying stopped. Not gradually. Not in stages. It stopped the way a held breath releases. One moment there was sound, and then there was space, and the space was so enormous that the whole house seemed to expand into it. 5 days of screaming. 4 nannies. 1 specialist, 4,000 euros, and a maid with lavender in her pocket. Mila's breathing deepened. Her grip on the lavender loosened slightly, not releasing, just softening, the way a fist becomes a hand when it finds something worth holding gently. Her eyelids fluttered, closed. I kept humming. I kept my hand on her back. I kept counting breaths per minute, heart rate through my palm, the small, beautiful arithmetic of a baby falling asleep for the first time in 5 days. The nursery was so quiet I could hear the clock in the hallway ticking. The one with the cracked face, the one no one looked at except me. That's when I heard the second sound. Not Mila, not the clock. A breath behind me. In the doorway, I turned slowly. The way you turn when you're holding someone else's most precious thing and you're not sure if you're about to be thanked or destroyed. Don Cesare Lombardi was standing in the doorway. He wasn't dressed like a Don. He was dressed like a man who'd stopped trying to sleep, Wrinkled white shirt, sleeves pushed past his elbows, no shoes. His hair was undone. His jaw was dark with 4 days of stubble. He looked like a man who'd been dismantled piece by a sound he couldn't stop. And now the sound had stopped, and he didn't know what to do with the silence. He was looking at me. Not at Mila, at me. And he wasn't angry. That was the first thing I registered. No anger. What was on his face was something I'd seen exactly once before, in a delivery room in Cork, on the face of a father who'd been told his baby wouldn't survive and then heard her cry. Recognition. Not of me, of something working. He didn't move from the doorway. He stood there for, I counted, 11 seconds, watching the baby breathe against my chest, watching my hand on her back, watching the sprig of lavender in her fist. Then he said 3 words. Not thank you. Not who are you. Not what are you doing in my daughter's nursery at 2 a.m. He said, how did you know? 3 words, and every one of them mattered. How? Not what. Not why. How? He wasn't asking me to justify my presence. He was asking about mechanism, about skill. He'd watched me unwrap the swaddle, adjust the thermostat, check behind her ears, and he'd seen that none of it was guesswork. Every movement had been precise, trained. Did you? Past tense. Observation confirmed. He'd been watching long enough to see the full sequence. He'd watched me diagnose his daughter. No, not think, not guess, not try. No. He'd seen certainty in my hands, and he wanted to understand where it came from. I held his gaze. It cost me something. This was a man whose eye contact was a test most people failed. But I held it because the alternative was looking away, and looking away would have been a lie. My hands knew. My training knew. And I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. Not anymore. I was a midwife, I said, before I was this. I gestured with my chin at the apron, the mop handle visible through the doorway, the bucket of lavender water growing cold in the hallway. He processed that. I watched him process it, the way his eyes moved from my face to my hands, to the baby to my hands again, reclassifying, reorganizing. A man who dealt in information, refiling me from staff, domestic maintenance, to something he didn't have a file for yet. The rash behind her ears, I added, because the midwife in me couldn't stop once she'd started. It's a milk protein intolerance. She needs a hydrolyzed formula. The proteins are pre-broken so her gut can absorb them. The current formula is causing intestinal cramping. That's why she cries. It's not behavioral, it's pain. He stared at me. The swaddle was too tight, I continued, restricting her diaphragm, and the room temperature. It should be 20 to 21 degrees, not 23. Babies overheat before they can tell you. Silence. Mila breathed against my chest. In, out. The lavender moved slightly with each exhale. He nodded. Once. The kind of nod that isn't agreement, it's acknowledgement. The kind of nod a man gives when he's received information that will change something and he needs time to decide what. Then he turned and walked away. No thank you. No explanation. No you can go or you can stay. Just footsteps down the dark hallway growing fainter, until the only sound in the nursery was the clock and the baby and my own heartbeat, which I realized had been running at 94 beats per minute for the last 11 minutes. I stayed in the chair until 4 a.m. Mila slept the entire time. When Daria came back, flustered, apologetic, smelling of cigarette smoke, I placed Mila gently in the crib, tucked the lavender sprig beside her pillow, and went back to my mop. The next morning, I cleaned the hallway as usual. Same tiles, same cracks, same invisible woman. But on the nursery shelf, next to the monitor and the white noise machine, there was a tin of hydrolyzed formula that hadn't been there the night before. He'd listened 3 days of silence, 3 days of Mila sleeping through the night on the new formula, 3 days of the house exhaling, 3 days of me cleaning floors and pretending nothing had changed. Everything had changed. I could feel it in the way Sarah watched me, tighter, more focused, the way a cat watches a bird it hasn't decided to pounce on yet. Someone had told her. Or she'd noticed the formula change, or she'd noticed that the crying had stopped and done the math. On the 4th morning, she found me in the utility room, wringing out a cloth. Nell. Her voice was crisper than usual. Official. You're to pack your things and be out by noon. I didn't ask why. I already knew. Gianna had found out that the fat maid had been in the nursery, had touched the baby, had overridden the specialist's advice by existing in the same room as his patient and quietly, without anyone's permission, diagnosing what he couldn't. In Gianna Lombardi's house, that wasn't initiative. It was treason. I went to my room. I folded my apron, the deep red one, the only thing I owned that still felt like mine, and placed it on the bed. I put my lavender tin in my bag. I didn't have much else. 14 months, and my whole life fit in a duffel bag I'd bought at a market in Naples for €12. I was zipping the bag when I heard his voice, not in my room, in the hallway. Carrying through the walls the way Mila's crying used to carry, except this sound didn't make you want to run. This sound made you freeze. She stays. 2 words. The same voice that negotiated shipping routes and settled territorial disputes and made men twice his age sit down when he stood up. Quiet. Final. The kind of voice that doesn't repeat itself because it doesn't need to. I opened my door. I shouldn't have. I should have stayed inside, invisible, the way I'd trained myself to be. But I opened it 3 inches, enough to see the hallway. Cesare was standing between my room and the staircase. Gianna was in front of him, 61 years old, pearls at her throat, the kind of woman whose beauty had calcified into authority. Sarah was behind her, already rearranging her face into whatever expression Gianna needed from her next. Gianna spoke first. She's a cleaning woman, Cesare. She touched your daughter without permission, without credentials, she diagnosed in 40 seconds, what your €4,000 specialist couldn't find in 3 hours. His voice hadn't changed, same volume, same temperature. But the information in it landed like a verdict. She identified a milk protein intolerance by examining the skin behind my daughter's ears. She corrected the room temperature, adjusted the swaddle, and got Mila to sleep for the first time in 5 days. Your specialist left with a diagnosis of general fussiness. She left with a sleeping baby. Gianna's mouth opened, closed, opened again. She's not qualified. She's a midwife. She's a disgraced midwife. I had Sarah look into her background. Her license was revoked. I know. He said it like he'd known for days, like he'd looked into it himself, quietly, the way he looked into everything, thoroughly and without asking permission. I read the file. I also read the review board transcript. She wasn't the one who made the mistake. She was the one who couldn't afford a lawyer. The hallway went silent. Gianna stood very still, the stillness of a woman who just realized that the son she thought she directed had been directing himself all along. She stays, Cesare said again. And you will not discuss her weight, her history, or her presence in this house with anyone on staff. Are we clear? He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked toward the study, and I watched his back until it disappeared around the corner. And I stood there in my doorway with my half-packed bag and my heart doing something it hadn't done in 14 months. It was beating like it belonged to someone who mattered. Gianna Lombardi was not a woman who lost quietly. I should have known. I should have watched the way she folded that silence into something sharper over the next 3 days, the way she nodded at dinner when Cesare mentioned the new formula, the way she smiled at me, actually smiled when I passed her in the hallway. It was the smile of a woman rearranging the stage. On the 7th morning after the nursery, I came upstairs to clean and found a woman I'd never seen sitting in the rocking chair in Mila's room, mid-40s, starched white uniform. ID badge from a pediatric agency in Rome that Gianna had connections to, the kind of agency that sends nannies who are really surveillance. Her name was Valentina. She had a master's degree in child development and a face that suggested she'd never once been caught off guard by anything, including infants. She was holding Mila. Mila was screaming. I stood in the hallway, the same tiles, the same clock with a cracked face, and I listened to my baby scream. Not my baby, the Dawn's baby. Except somewhere between that first night and this 7th morning, the word had slipped, and I couldn't slip it back. Cesare appeared from somewhere. I didn't hear him coming, but he was suddenly there. The way thunder is suddenly there when you've been watching the lightning build. He walked into the nursery, took Mila from Valentina's arms, not roughly, not angrily, but with the precision of a man who had run out of patience for systems that didn't work. Valentina started to protest. Sir, I was just adjusting her position. The protocol says. He wasn't listening. He was walking across the nursery with his daughter in his arms, her cries echoing off the walls, and he was walking toward the door. Toward me. He stopped in front of me. Mila was shaking against his chest, face red, fists balled. He held her out. Not handed her, held her out. The way you hold out something that belongs to someone. I took her. My hands knew before my mind did, cradling her head, supporting her spine, pulling her close against the spot on my chest where the lavender lived. She pressed her face into my collarbone and the crying broke into hiccups, then whimpers, then breath. Silence, again. The silence that only we could make. Cesare turned to Gianna, who was standing in the corner of the nursery with a face I will remember for the rest of my life, the face of a woman watching her architecture collapse. The baby chose, his voice was soft, not loud, soft, the dangerous softness of a man who is finished being negotiated with. I'm done overruling her. He looked at Valentina. Thank you, your services are no longer needed. Then he looked at me, at my red apron, at my hands on his daughter's back, at the lavender sprig that Mila was already reaching for, because babies remember what comforts them. You're not the maid anymore, he said. And the house, the whole house, with its marble floors and its cracked clocks and its 14 months of silence, rearranged itself around me. 3 weeks later, I sleep in the room next to the nursery. It has a window that faces the garden and a bed that's wider than any bed I've slept in since Cork, and on the nightstand there's a ceramic vase with dried lavender in it that I didn't put there. Cesare put it there. He didn't tell me. I just came in one evening and it was there, and the room smelled like my old life mixed with my new one, and I sat on the edge of the bed and cried for the first time in 14 months. Not sad tears. The other kind. The kind that come when something you'd given up on starts again, and you realize you didn't know how tightly you'd been holding your breath until you stopped. Mila sleeps through the night now. She's gained 2 pounds on the hydrolyzed formula. The rash behind her ears is gone. She has a laugh that sounds like water over stones, this bubbling, surprised sound, as if she can't believe the world keeps being this funny. She still reaches for the lavender. Every night when I put her down, her hand opens and closes until she finds the sprig I tuck beside her pillow. She falls asleep holding it the way other babies hold blankets, with absolute trust that it will still be there when she wakes up. Last Thursday, I was in the nursery at midnight, not because Mila was crying, just because sometimes I check on her the way midwives do, with my fingertips and my breath and the quiet arithmetic of heartbeats, and I noticed the baby book on the shelf was different. It was heavier, something pressed between the pages. I opened it. The lavender sprig, the first one, the one from that night. The one Mila pulled from my apron pocket at 2 a.m., 5.5 weeks ago. The one she held while she fell asleep for the first time in 5 days. He'd saved it. He'd pressed it between the pages of his daughter's baby book, where her first photograph and her hospital bracelet and her birth announcement lived. He'd put my lavender next to her beginning. I stood there holding that book, and I thought about all the things that can fit between the pages of a life. A license you lost, a name they called you, a hallway you mopped for 14 months while your hands begged to do the work they were trained for, and one night, one door, one baby who needed you more than she needed anyone else in the house, and one man who was brave enough to let you prove it. He didn't rescue me. I want you to hear that. He didn't save me from anything. I wasn't drowning, I was just mopping floors in a house where nobody thought to look down and see who was holding the mop. He asked the right question, 3 words, how did you know? And I was brave enough to answer, Nell Morrow, the woman who walked into the nursery. So what did you vote? Stay in the hallway, keep mopping, keep invisible, keep safe? Or walk into the nursery because you know what no one else in that house knows, and you're done pretending you don't? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. If Nell's story stayed with you, if you've ever been the person who knew the answer but wasn't allowed to speak it, subscribe. I tell these stories every week, and the next one is already written. And if you're new here, welcome. You just found the hallway. Now decide which door you're walking through, and if you've ever been standing in a hallway with hands that knew exactly what to do and a world that told you to keep mopping, that hype button below this video. 3 free taps. Every week. 1 tap, and Nell's lavender reaches someone who's still wringing out their cloth in a utility room, convinced that nobody sees them. 1 tap, and this